The young infantrymen have ventured into a trap. Shots are ringing out constantly. Only a dozen meet their objective, the schoolhouse. This is a slaughter.
But the ones who made it, their orders now were to come through this laneway.
Okay.
To reinforce their men who were having such a rough time here in Percy Place. Now, Section Commander George Reynolds, who was overseeing the defence of Clanwilliam House.
Okay.
When he saw this, he became very, very concerned because he knew that this laneway here was the escape route for Michael Malone and James Grace. Up there at the end is the rear entrance to 25 Northumberland Road, and they'd already planned that if things got a little bit, if they couldn't manage the situation, this was going to be their escape route.
Yeah.
Now, the troops who ran the gauntlet again of Malone's fire, they came running down through this laneway here. Their orders were to come out onto Percy Place. Now, common sense would dictate that, if you're under that sort of fire, we'll stay where you are, but orders are orders. So they came out onto Percy Place, and these guys it was just an avalanche of fire coming from Clanwilliam House. It got to the point where Major Hanson was wounded, and a sergeant took over, and just seeing that there was no way out of this. The guys were just getting shot as they crawled along. There was nowhere for them to go. He ordered a charge. He thought, to hell with this, let's just get down and take out the schoolhouse, bayonet or whatever. He ran down along here and headlong into a wall of fire from Boland's Mills, Clanwilliam House, Robert's Yard, the workshops, the railway line. They just ran into this. Was a perfectly engineered kill zone, is the best way to describe it. What happened? This is now where it starts to get really, really grotesque. Because it gets an awful lot worse now. They're trying to take the schoolhouse. They're still convinced that this is the main enemy position.
One of the British wounded, he was in Patrick Dunn's hospital. He was in quite a bad way, but he was like unconscious, and then he'd suddenly wake up and just scream, "Has the schoolhouse been taken? Yeah, has the schoolhouse been taken? Yeah." Then go unconscious again, and he was doing this all night from Wednesday, from the time he'd been shot till all the way until Thursday as well.
The 7 rebels who are occupying Clanwilliam House. Mm-hmm. Commander Reynolds summoned his men and he says, "Lads, come and have a look at this." All along the roadway here, there was so many British troops trying to push themselves forward. They were in the gutters of the road, in the middle of the road, all the way down beyond the crossroads there, that they had probably just run out of places to hide at this stage, but their orders were advance. What these guys saw was a caterpillar or a snake. It's described as a pulsating beast. That's how we describe it in the book. They wanted to slay a pulsating beast. That's all they could see was this mass of khaki pulsating on the ground towards them. And they just fired. They just started shooting, and it was like they were trying to kill an animal that was coming to eat them.
Well, the British are trying to deal with the number 25 Northumberland Road position. They're still launching attack after attack up Northumberland Road towards the schoolhouse. Now, as you can imagine, these guys are run forward. They can see the schoolhouse on the right hand side. They're getting closer and closer. Suddenly there it is, their focus is on them, and they come in level with the parochial hall, and you know, that just opens up on them. There's like soldiers falling everywhere. Clanwilliam House is firing to their front. You know, the panic would have set in on them. You know, there's the objective just to their right, and they just can't reach it. And as soon as they turn back to run back down Northumberland Road, the parochial hall opens up again on them.
It got to the stage where the British couldn't do anything, so they just charged. And they came, and they came, and they came. They just kept on running. They ran past the parochial hall. They took fire from there. They took fire again from Clanwilliam House. They took fire from Malone and Grace, and they just kept coming.
Yeah, one of the bystanders at the Battle of Mount Street Bridge, he was up quite near the bridge, he says, was Lewis Redmond Howard. Now, he was nephew to John Redmond, who was the National Volunteers. He said that he'd been watching the battle unfold, watching it all going on, and decided I had enough, and he went into the hospital and offered their services. So they gave him a white coat and they put him on a stretcher with another guy called Highland. And he says that between them, they carried 70 British soldiers on that one stretcher from the bridge to the hospital. He also says that when the ceasefires were on, there were still shots going off. He describes it as every second, every yard was a matter of life and death. It was either defeat or victory. So this is where you get the British trying to advance during the ceasefires and the rebels firing back at them.
A lot of civilians were watching this. I mean, you know, there was obvious danger there. A lot of doctors and nurses came out from Sir Patrick Dun's hospital, and they asked Commander Reynolds, could we have ceasefire? See the bell tower in the church?
Yeah.
They set up a Vickers machine gun.
Oh yeah.
In there.
Yeah, at number 25 Northumberland Road, that position was being hard fought for. The British taking positions in the houses opposite. They were launching attack after attack, but the two volunteers that were in there, Malone and Grace, were still holding out. The British managed to get fixing explosives to the door and blew the door off the hinges basically, and then they forced an entry there. Now, it was still hard fought for it at this point.
I heard movements to the left and someone trying to turn the handle of the door. I fired through the panels of the door and I heard a rush of feet away from it. A few minutes afterwards I heard the crashing of glass and a door at the rear with steps leading into the back garden was burst open and some English troops rushed in. I had only time just to reload with a fresh clip. This I emptied at them. There was a third rush of enemy troops, and as they appeared at the head of the kitchen stairs, I knelt in the doorway and opened fire. There was a crash of a volley from above, and afterwards I saw a few shouting, "Get him! Get him!" and it was in that volley that Micheál Malone died.
after number 25 fell, the British turned their attention then to the parochial hall.
The final battle here didn't last very long.
Now the thing about the parochial hall is it's just set back a bit, so you know, it's not as if they could sneak up to the windows and basically start firing into the windows. So what they did was they launched a hand grenade attack. So they would run up as close as possible to it, throw hand grenades at the parochial hall. But all this time then they're still under fire, the British are still under fire from Clanwilliam House. Volunteers in the parochial hall were starting to run low on ammunition. They realised the position was about to be overrun anyway, so they decided to evacuate. So as they were going out into Percy Lane, they happened to run into a patrol of British soldiers and were captured.
Okay. The 4 men were taken out the back of the building, and there's a yard out the back of the building, and a British officer took out his pistol to shoot Joe Clark in the head, and for some reason, he might have turned his head away at the time, he put the gun up against his head, he fired the bullet and he missed. The shot went into a neighbouring garden that was being used as a field dressing station. There was a British doctor, a military doctor there, who came in and berated the officer, told him not to be doing anything, so just to stop what he was doing. And those 4 guys were taken prisoner.
So eventually the British managed to take their objective, which was the schoolhouse. So they start launching attacks across the bridge.
Was if there was an enemy position there, you overwhelm it, and there was probably a lot of arrogance there as well. You know, these guys weren't regarded by the British as being regular soldiers. They were, you know, they were just undisciplined rebels as far as they were concerned. There was no way that his army was going to be, you know, driven off course by a bunch of undisciplined rebels. They opened fire on Clanwilliam House. Yeah. They had a clear view from the bell tower of Clanwilliam House. There were snipers up there as well. And the rebels who were obviously under fire. I mean, it was ferocious fire. Yeah. I mean, they're in these rooms where suddenly, you know, the Vickers gun would shoot, you know, 500-600 rounds a minute, you know, and this is coming in through their windows.
Yeah, in Clanwilliam House, George Reynolds, who was the commander in that position, he decided to spread his men out because they were on the 4th floor. Everyone was on the 4th floor, so he sent 2 men, Willie Ronan and James Doyle, up to the top floor to take a bit of heat off the 4th floor. And also what they did was they moved back from the window so they weren't so exposed to the British rifle fire. And when Willie Ronan and James Doyle had a nightmare getting up to the stairs, because basically the stairs had nearly been shot away at this point. The house was under such heavy fire that it was crumbling as they were going up, crawling up the stairs. And when they eventually got up there, they started firing, like I said, from the windows. They took up positions just a bit set back and were firing down onto the bridge. It was at this point that Patrick Doyle shouted out, "Boys, isn't this a great day for Ireland?" And pretty soon afterwards was shot in the head and killed. And then not long after that, Richard Murphy was shot as well. So the position was, things were starting to go wrong for that position at this point. Yeah, so the British, they eventually managed to cross the bridge.
At this point, Robert's Yard over here was bringing a lot of fire on the British positions here. There wasn't much respite for the British when they got over behind this wall. And then again, bear in mind, you had Boland's Mills who were just firing down on them as well. Okay. Having collected themselves, it got even worse. It got even more gruesome, if that's possible to imagine. Okay. They had to cross this bridge. Okay. They had to take that position there. Now, there was 5 volunteers left. When their comrades from A Company under Joe O'Connor saw the British forming up around here, they threw caution to the wind.
So they're lobbing hand grenades into the windows of Clanwilliam House. So George Reynolds decides, this is it, we're out of here, orders the evac, and as he stands up, he's hit and shot, and he dies a few minutes later.
Lieutenant Daffin was a 20-year-old British soldier from Worksop in Nottingham. He led the first charge and he was the first to get killed. They went storming across the bridge. The supporting charge was basically decimated. All the officers were wounded. There was a couple of NCOs who weren't. They were driven back. They collected themselves again, made several more charges under murderous fire all along here, and they also had fire still coming down on them from Clan William House. This went on for long enough for the doctors and the nurses to come back out again. Bodies began to pile up on this bridge. The shooting became so intense from the railway line that one of the men who was beside Captain John O'Connor screamed out in pain just suddenly, because his hand had become stuck to the breech of his gun when he was loading the bullet in with the heat of the firing, and Captain O'Connor had to peel his hand away, and what he did then was start shooting again. This was just, it just got there was
so like the skin was actually probably coming off.
Skin was left on the thing, but these guys were just on autopilot at this stage. They knew their comrades were in here. They had to save them. They saw this avalanche of khaki that was starting to steamroll across the bridge. Bodies were piling up, but the British, they weren't stopping at this stage. A lot of the British soldiers that were here, they would have lost probably any regard they had for their own lives. They would have traded it just to get at these guys. The levels of hatred they would have had at that point. They made charge after charge. Doctors and nurses actually stayed here under fire. A lot of the troops played dead. It's all they could do. There was people. Troops here would have been dying, would have been wounded, they would have been screaming. Other guys would have been lying there quietly. The life fading out of their eyes. The doctors and nurses going around trying to save as many lives as they could. All the while there's this fire going on. The machine gun is still firing across the canal. A lot of British troops were starting to filter down along Warwick, knowing that this position no longer represented a threat. They did the sensible thing. They crossed up a Mount Street Bridge. They started to come down along Warrington Place. But again, these guys here were still coming under fire from the rebel positions over here in Bowlands.
Yeah.
Eventually, it got to the point where there was a wrought iron railing surrounding Clan William House.
Okay.
So they start to lob hand grenades at the building.
One NCO, a British NCO, just presumably full of adrenaline, full of rage, got to the railings, assaulted the railings, pulled the pin in a hand grenade, chucked it up at the second window. Incredibly brave thing to do. His bravery was rewarded by the grenade bouncing off the window back down where it exploded next to his own head. He was killed. Some of his fellow sergeants and the privates lying on the bridge, playing dead. It was all they could do, crawling across, creeping forward, until eventually they got to here where they just had to make the charge.
So on the ground floor, basically, you have Lieutenant Foster of the 27 Sherwoods. He's taking control. All the other officers have been either killed or wounded.
Ireland's Thermopylae is that stretch of road.
I